Have you ever noticed how some people seem perfectly harmless, even kind, but something about the way they interact leaves you feeling drained or confused? What if the most dangerous sign in psychology isn't rage, aggression, or even manipulation? What if it's something hidden, subtle, and almost invisible at first? Carl Gustav Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist and founder of analytical psychology, devoted much of his life to studying what he called the shadow. He believed the shadow held all the qualities we deny or repress in ourselves. And while this idea may sound abstract, Jung discovered that when the shadow breaks into relationships, it creates one of the most destructive forces in human psychology. The shadow. To understand what Jung meant by this hidden danger, we first need to explore his most famous and often misunderstood idea, the shadow. In his book Psychology and Religion, 1938, Jung described the shadow as the thing a person has no wish to be. It is made of traits, desires, and impulses we repress because they don't fit our self-image. For example, someone who prides themselves on kindness may repress anger. Someone who values honesty may repress envy or deceit. But Jung realized repression doesn't erase these qualities. Instead, they live on in the unconscious. In Ion, 1951, he wrote that the shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality. If ignored, the shadow acts independently, shaping behavior and relationships without our awareness. This insight emerged not from theory alone, but from decades of clinical practice. Jung saw patient after patient who claimed to be victims of others' malice, yet their stories revealed they were blind to their own contribution. The shadow unacknowledged within was silently shaping their external world. But Jung didn't just stop at describing the shadow. He wanted to know what happens when it escapes the unconscious and begins to shape our relationships. That is where the danger truly begins. When it escapes, the danger intensifies when the shadow doesn't just remain hidden, but breaks free in a particular psychological mechanism, projection. In The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, 1959, Jung explained that projection changes the world into the replica of one's own unknown face. This means that instead of seeing others as they truly are, we see them as mirrors of what we deny in ourselves. A man unable to admit his aggression might constantly accuse others of hostility. A woman denying her envy might perceive jealousy. Everywhere she looks. Projection itself is common, we all do it, but in some people it becomes dangerous. Jung noticed that in his most troubling cases, projection was not tentative, but absolute. The individual was utterly convinced that what they saw in others was real, even when all evidence suggested otherwise. Yet even projection by itself wasn't what Jung found most chilling. What truly alarmed him was a particular sign that marked his most destructive patients. And it is here that we arrive at the red flag you need to know. The red flag, the psychological red flag Jung identified, is unconscious shadow projection carried with absolute conviction. This is more than ordinary projection. It is when a person attributes to others traits, motives, or intentions that belong to themselves, and they do it with such certainty that they no longer question it. To them, it is not an opinion, it is truth. Jung saw this repeatedly. A patient might insist that others were manipulative, cruel, or dishonest, when in fact those very qualities were the ones the patient could not face within. What disturbed Jung was not only the blindness of these patients, but their total confidence. They were immune to evidence. Attempts to correct their perception only reinforced their belief. In Civilization in Transition, 1959, Jung warned that the possession of an absolute truth is always a danger to the soul. This is exactly the danger here. The person projects their shadow and clings to it as truth. They are not lying, their perception of reality has been rewritten by the unconscious. Modern neuroscience supports this. Michael Gazzaniga, in Who's In Charge, 2011, showed how the brain constantly builds coherent stories even when false. Once projection hardens into conviction, the mind literally filters reality to fit the story. The projector lives inside a psychological distortion field and drags others into it. Once you understand this sign, the next question becomes clear. Why does it have such devastating effects, not only on individuals but on entire groups? Jung's answer points to something both psychological and social. Why it destroys. Why is this particular sign so destructive? Because conviction is contagious. Leon Festinger's classic work, A Theory of Cognitive Dissonance, 1957, demonstrated how strongly people conform to confident beliefs, even against evidence. When someone projects with certainty, others around them feel psychological pressure to align. This is how projection spreads into families, workplaces, and communities. A person convinced of your supposed flaws begins to recruit others, often under the guise of concern. Soon, multiple people see you not as you are, but through the projector's distorted lens. Jung called this phenomenon collective possession. The consequences can be devastating. Reputations destroyed, relationships broken, entire groups reorganized around one person's unconscious shadow. Victims often describe the experience as gaslighting, being told they have motives or emotions they know they don't. The more they protest, the more guilty they appear. Jung saw this pattern repeatedly. He recognized it not as malice, but as unconsciousness, and that's what makes it so dangerous. The projector truly believes what they say. Their certainty blinds both themselves and those around them. How to protect yourself? The damage projection can cause is immense. But Jung never believed we were helpless. He offered a path forward, one that begins not with others but with ourselves. So what can you do if you encounter this sign? Jung's advice was deceptively simple. Become conscious. Awareness is your eye. Shield. In his memoir, Memories, Dreams, Reflections, 1961, Jung wrote, "The acceptance of oneself is the essence of the whole moral problem and the epitome of a whole outlook on life. People who cannot accept their own shadow inevitably project it outward. But if you can recognize projection for what it is, you no longer have to live inside someone else's distorted reality. The practical steps are clear. First, trust your inner experience. If someone describes you in a way that feels alien, don't surrender your reality. Second, resist the urge to convince them they are not open to counter-evidence. Third, set boundaries or, when necessary, withdraw. Jung believed that sometimes the only safe response is to step away from those who project with conviction. Modern Jungian scholars like Murray Stein, in Jung's Map of the Soul, 1998, affirm this. Recognizing projection breaks its power. The Kasi. Danger lies not in the accusation itself, but in being drawn into the distorted field. Consciousness allows you to see clearly what belongs to you and what belongs to them. And this brings us to the heart of Jung's warning. The greatest danger is not other people's darkness. It is unconsciousness itself. Recognizing the sign gives you a choice to step outside the distortion and remain whole. The most dangerous psychological sign, according to Carl Jung, is not open hostility or narcissism. It is the unconscious projection of the shadow, fused with absolute certainty. When you encounter it, remember, you are not required to participate in someone else's distorted world. Have you ever experienced someone projecting onto you with complete conviction, leaving you questioning your own reality?